This is Origin Stories, the Leaky Foundation podcast. I'm Meredith Johnson. Humans spend more time growing up, more time as kids, than almost any other creature on Earth. And human children need a lot of care. As a species, we invest an enormous amount of time and energy into bringing up our babies. This unique investment is a big part of what makes us, us. Over the next 3 episodes, we'll explore human evolution by looking at childhood and the fundamental relationships that shape our species and our lives. Origin Stories contributor Leo Hornak, who recently became a father, has our story.
So this is your elder.
Yeah, that's the one that's
such
nice.
Gorgeous kids, aren't they?
This one's nuts, that one's like spoiled in a minute.
It's 11 in the morning and I'm at a suburban home on the outskirts of London. There's about 10 people here, mostly in their 20s and 30s. And right now it's break time and everyone is swapping baby photos. It's fair to say that as the only man, I stand out a little bit.
Oh, lovely.
They're so cute. Good looking boys.
No, that's a footballer.
Maybe it's not that surprising. There's a real emphasis on kids and children at this meeting. Everyone, apart from me, is here to learn a new set of skills. Skills deeply tied to the idea of parenthood and motherhood in particular. This is one of the only courses in Britain for training what are known as postnatal doulas. Women who support new mothers and babies in the weeks immediately after birth. When the break finishes, everyone gathers round the coffee table. Kiki Hansard is today's teacher, and she talks us through some of the ways she helps a new client. And of course, this being Britain, tea plays an important role. Kiki calls this technique intelligent tea drinking.
I'll let myself in and I'll shout up to her, "Hi, it's only me. Would you like a cup of tea?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, I'll be down in a minute." Or there might be a crying, as in, "I'm not okay." And then, of course, I will go upstairs. We'll sit down and I'll just say, "So how was last night?"
Postnatal doula is a relatively modern job title, but the principle that new mothers need a special kind of support is ancient. Everything Kiki teaches is based on the understanding that becoming a new mother is one of the most challenging experiences human life has to offer. And that meeting that challenge is easier if you have someone in your corner who's been there before. Someone like Kiki.
We call that a doula now, rather than, the grandmother, the auntie, the sister, the wise woman of the village, the people that you can come to and get support from, but that wouldn't take over from you.
In this episode of Origin Stories, the first of a 3-part series on the evolution of the human family, I'm exploring why that need for support during early motherhood is such a fundamental part of what it means to be human, and whether our species' approach to motherhood might hold the key to some of the most important traits that set us apart from other mammals and primates.
That's Obama the llama.
One of the greatest living scientists in the field of evolutionary anthropology is also a llama farmer. Sarah Blaffer Hrdy doesn't just raise llamas, though. At her beautiful farm in rural California, there are also almond orchards and vegetable gardens. And every tour also includes a visit to Don Quixote the goat.
Hey, Don Quixote.
But before she got into goat rearing and llama farming, Sarah's academic career was focused on the evolution of human motherhood and human child rearing strategies. Sarah's work has transformed our understanding of how and why we parent the way we do. It all started back in the 70s, when she was inspired by a change in her own life.
When I brought my first baby home from the hospital, I was ambitious, and I had just published my second book, and I was working on a third, and I wanted to write, and somehow I found myself feeling quite torn about having to turn my life over 24/7 to another creature.
Her husband was working full-time and wasn't available to help with childcare. Not unusual at that time.
So I was all alone with this baby, and I had to ask myself, wait a minute, I'm a mammal, I'm a primate. Why is it that I feel ambivalent about turning my life over to this little gene vehicle?
A little gene vehicle that needs constant attention, food, physical contact, changes of clothes, entertainment.
And that's when I set out to explain what is maternal ambivalence and love. There was no question I loved my baby, but I felt ambivalent about how much she demanded of me.
And what she realised is that her ambivalence, that feeling of being overwhelmed, might not be anything to do with her as an individual. It might be that human babies are simply not designed to be looked after by just one person. And even by the standards of other primates, human babies are very demanding.
They are very costly. 9 months gestation, that's nothing compared to lactation. And in hunter-gatherer societies, weaned at around 2.5 to 3 years. But it's after they're weaned, they continue to need to be subsidized. And if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, it takes about 13 million calories to raise a baby from birth to when they are nutritionally independent.
Compare that with our closest primate relatives.
Chimpanzees, as soon as they're weaned, are pretty much provisioning themselves. They have learned what to eat, how to get it, how to process it. And they can get it.
So young chimps are independent much quicker than humans. And that's not the only factor that makes human motherhood so challenging. There's also what's called the interbirth interval. That's the average time between births for the average mother. And research shows that most of our nearest relatives tend to take longer gaps between births, spacing out their offspring on average more than us. Chimp mothers are one example. On average, they give birth every 5.5 years. But throughout most of human history, the interbirth interval for humans is believed to be much shorter, just 3 or 4 years. As a result, human mothers are often still caring intensively for one child when the second, third, or fourth arrives. Anyone who's been part of a large family knows exactly what those stresses and strains are like for parents and kids on a daily basis. So, we humans not only have unusually demanding babies that take a very long time to raise, we also have them more frequently. In short, human mothers don't have it easy.
It's more than a mother could manage by herself.
How and why have humans arrived at this system of motherhood? Sitting at home, surrounded by diapers and baby food, Sarah began to develop a new theory of human childhood.
An ape with the life history attributes of Homo sapiens, meaning these long lifespans, very long periods of development, very costly offspring, could not have evolved unless group members other than the parents, in addition to the parents, had helped to care for and especially provision offspring and their mothers.
This is known as the cooperative breeding hypothesis. According to the hypothesis, rearing an adorable human gene vehicle is only feasible as a team project. It's not designed to be done alone, which means adults other than the mother must be persuaded to give up time and resources to help the survival of her child. That could mean genetic relatives, or it could mean other close members of the social group. Or, in London in 2023, that could mean a postnatal doula trained by Kiki. But here's what's strange about this idea in evolutionary terms. From a Darwinian viewpoint, giving up your own time and energy to help someone else's child thrive is dangerously unselfish behaviour. Cooperative breeding does happen in other species, but it's far from the norm.
It's found in about 9% of 10,000 species of birds. It's rare in mammals, about 3 to 5% of mammals, but it's more common in carnivores and primates.
And the human version of cooperative breeding also has some strange features. It's unusually close and costly teamwork compared to many other primates.
One critical difference, it's that a mother can trust the individual she's around enough that she's willing to let someone else care for her babies. What people don't always understand is that in other apes, mothers are not going to give them up. There is nothing more possessive than a mother chimpanzee.
So a mother chimpanzee won't even pass, even for a moment, the infant to any other close relatives to look at?
No. But if I were a female chimpanzee, I wouldn't let anyone else hold my baby either, because if there's a male around, he might kill it and eat it. And people think of chimpanzees as in the early days when Jane Goodall was describing them as our friends. They eat babies. It's a source of lipids, for goodness sake. And fat is a desirable thing. No, you don't let someone else have your baby.
There's a photograph Sarah sometimes uses to illustrate her theory. It's a photo of a family scene from a hunter-gatherer group in southern Africa. But the dynamics of the scene could come from almost any human culture in any era.
Be a photograph taken years ago by the photographer and anthropologist Marge Shostak, who was living among the Kung or the Junwasi people in the Kalahari. And there was a young woman who had just given birth outside of camp, all by herself. She walked back into camp carrying her baby, handed it to her own mother, who's there. And the grandmother in this wonderful photograph is massaging the baby's scalp. And other females are all around. No chimpanzee would do that. A female chimpanzee who gives birth goes off, she kind of hides in the forest, and she's going to stay away from others while her baby is little. This is a massive difference.
So I think as humans, we kind of take it for granted that lots of people who are not moms will help take care of kids, right?
One of the many evolutionary biologists who've built on Sarah's work is Stacy Rosenbaum. She's assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Michigan, and she was once a Leakey Foundation grantee. One of the areas she's looked at is this conundrum of the unselfishness, the altruism and trust that cooperative breeding requires.
In most families, moms are getting assistance from dads or siblings or aunts or uncles or friends. There's just a huge list of people that help us with childcare. And that's true all over the world. The degree of it varies from place to place and who it is that provides support, but it's true universally in humans. In the vast majority of mammals, that is not the case. Moms do virtually everything by themselves, and there are pretty good, it turns out, evolutionary reasons for that. And the basic idea is that in most mammals, individuals are going to be able to increase their fitness, meaning the number of offspring that they themselves leave behind, not by helping a mom with her own offspring, but by going and pursuing having more offspring of their own.
One possibility is that our use of cooperative breeding pays off in other ways.
One of the things that is unique about being a human child is there's this incredible amount of stuff that human children have to learn. And I think that most scientists feel that the sheer range of things that human children have to learn is much bigger than the range of things that most other animals' offspring need to learn. And part of the thinking is that we have these very extended childhoods where we are reliant on others for a long time, partly because it allows us the time that we need in order to develop the many skills that you require as a human, that are, what those skills are vary from culture to culture, but there's a lot of them.
Languages are one obvious example, but there are others.
Keep in mind that the kind of range of things that adult humans do also involves a lot of like fine motor skill stuff.
Fine motor skills include the dexterity needed to put on clothes, use tools, and in some societies, sharpen a cutting stone, play the piano, or download a podcast onto a smartphone.
Right, and those tend to be the things that we think are lacking in a typical 3-year-old.
So a cooperative breeding model, where mums get more support from others, might allow us to have more kids more often, and for those kids to grow up more slowly, giving them the chance to learn more complex skills for adult life. In short, allow us to become human. There's a natural experiment that we can look to for a comparison. There's another highly intelligent great ape, where mothers took the opposite to the cooperative breeding route.
So all orangutan moms are basically single parents. Fathers don't really contribute to offspring care, and so it's really all on the moms.
This is Amy Scott.
I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of New Hampshire, and I study conservation genetics and endangered species behavior.
Amy was also a Leakey Foundation grantee. She spent a long time in the forests of Borneo, observing the parenting strategies of orangutans, some of the most solitary mothers in the primate world. An orangutan mother and child will exist almost without contact with other orangutans for years, until the infant is weaned and capable of caring for itself entirely. One of the mother-child pairs Amy tracked through the forest treetops were Bibi and Bias.
Bibi is the mom, and Bias is her second offspring. Bias is a boy. So when I observed Bibi and Bias together, Bias was between 3 and 4 years old, which is, it's like a fun age to watch offspring because they're really exploring the world. They're doing a lot of playing.
Some of that play sounds like it has echoes in human childhoods. Bias would explore different plants in the canopy, for example.
Things like bouncing on a liana, so like on a vine, bouncing on it because it has give, right? Or swinging on it.
But also important differences. In some primates, including humans, a lot of infant play is social, about interacting with others, not skills needed by Bias.
A lot of their playing is solitary. So there's definitely personalities. They're definitely unique individuals.
And then there's the fact that Bias was growing up without contact with any siblings. And that's built into orangutan motherhood. Orangutans have possibly the longest interbirth interval in the mammal world, up to 9 years in some cases. So Bibi's other daughter had already grown up and moved on by the time Amy was observing Bias's infanthood.
Of course, there's a trade-off, right? In order to survive and reproduce, that then means that offspring are more dependent on mom than they might be if they were living in a social group.
A mother like Bibi simply doesn't have the time and resources to raise more than one baby at a time.
Because of this longer interbirth interval, they might have fewer offspring during their lifetime than, like, for instance, a female human would be capable of. A female human could have twice as many offspring during that time period as an orangutan could.
From an evolutionary standpoint, fewer offspring is a risky strategy, making the survival of each offspring even more important. But there are positive trade-offs to a solitary orangutan motherhood. In human societies, a child's life chances often depend on the level of support that the rest of the community is willing to offer. There may be intense competition for childcare, negotiation for time and attention from grandparents, partners, neighbours. Moving through the treetops, Bibi didn't need to get involved in the complex politics of primate cooperation. It was just her and Bias travelling to the next feeding destination.
He has a smaller body moving through the canopy, so Bibi would wait, turn around, look at Bias, and he would eventually catch up, or he would get stuck and she would reach out her arm, pull him in and put him on her body. Eventually they made it where they were going.
Sarah Blaffer Hrdy's theory suggests that becoming a cooperative species in childcare has changed us in other ways as well. In particular, once kids begin to be raised cooperatively, she argues that humans were set on a path towards ever more social, empathetic, cooperative behaviour in other areas too.
Natural selection has to operate on a behavior that is expressed. Once you have babies being passed around, lots of other things can be selected for that previously had lied latent. Once you have individuals that care more about others, you have the scaffolding for grown-ups, adults, to be more interested in what others are thinking, which lays the groundwork for higher forms of communication, more sophisticated forms of communication. I think that was a very important scaffolding for the emergence of more sophisticated language.
If this is correct, we may have become an unusually cooperative species, and eventually even a speaking species, partly because for us, those advanced cooperative communicative skills are needed to ensure the survival of our children. And Sarah argues that the cooperative breeding instinct is also expressed in our instinctive reactions to other people's babies. Kids we're not related to. Most humans have a tendency to find babies and young children appealing, cute, interesting, adorable, regardless of whether they're relatives. According to Sarah, that tolerance of other people's kids is also no accident. It's a prompt from natural selection.
And the more tolerance you have, that generates a kind of a feedback loop. So, for example, being around babies increases oxytocin.
Oxytocin, the hormone associated with intense emotional bonding. And in fact, hormones and how they affect our emotions and behaviour are key to all of this. What's known as neuroendocrinology.
When you look at a cute baby, we are changing the neuroendocrinological milieu in which we spend our time, which makes possible behaviors which you might not normally see in a chimpanzee.
Those big adoring eyes, that first infant smile, they're all flooding your system with the hormones to predispose you to empathise and bond with a child. Survival of the cutest.
It's been especially important in my own work, thinking about how all these things change in infants.
And it's not just cuteness. Babies are also in competition with each other to become more socially adept, to learn how to communicate and bond with their carers faster. I spoke to Sarah through Zoom about this from my home in London.
Babysitters are in short supply, you may have noticed. And these babies are in competition with other babies to elicit care, because the infants reared this way are growing up with very different neural capacities than chimpanzees, which is a real surprise. And the differences were all in the social domain. Social communication. In the wild, chimpanzees don't point, but human children do, sure do. By age 2, they point right at what they want. And then I hear a baby cry.
It was very relevant. My son is having his bath because it's 6 o'clock here.
How old is he?
He's 14 months old, and he is communicating socially with his mother that he doesn't like having a bath.
Of course, yes. And he knows just how to get her to do what he wants.
Well, actually, let's ask about that. So what is going on in that conversation you can hear?
Let's imagine a little 14-month-old baby like your son crying in the tub right now, and it doesn't have a nice warm bath to be in. It's out on the woodland savannas of Africa. It needs to be held all the time to be safe from stinging insects, roving hyenas, whatever. He needs to be cared for. And he needs to be fed by others. There are other babies in the group that also need that caretaking attention.
So, not just survival of the cutest, survival of the most empathetic, according to Sarah.
so that they can be selected for, so that the little baby's just a little bit better at reading someone else's intentions, caring about their psychological preferences, are going to be the most cared for, the best fed, most likely to survive, to grow up, to breed. So it's not that the cooperative breeding hypothesis makes this more cooperative. It's an implication of the way babies develop in that system.
This is one of Sarah Blaffer Hrdy's central arguments. The human motherhood model has created a great deal of evolutionary pressure, predisposing all of us to be better at earning assistance and giving assistance to one another, cooperating. And when that community help isn't available, the consequences for mothers can be severe.
It's unrealistic to imagine that a mother can rear a baby out on the African savannas by herself, so that without social support, she retrenches, she bails out. And we see this a lot. And it bothers me when people are going on and on about postpartum depression, when, to me, the most obvious first step is to increase social support for that mother. Mothers need social support.
I have thought of one last question I should ask you, which is, I went to a class teaching postpartum doulas and learning from them, and one of the things the teacher said was, what we're doing is intelligent tea drinking to listen to the mother particularly and reduce the sense of isolation.
It's a source of social support. Shared tea drinking, food sharing is a very special kind of source of intimacy and social support. The intervention they're providing, it's one of the most cost-effective interventions you could have. It just needs to be recognized, and I love them all.
Back in London, the day's class is now over, and the new trainee postnatal doulas are gathering their things to leave. If Sarah Blaffer Hrdy is right, the skills being passed on here aren't just useful tips for helping new mums. The relationships being built here between mother, child and caregiver are at the very foundation of what makes us human.
We're not childminders. We're actually there for the mother and to support them. Our prime aim, I guess, is to replace that village that we don't have anymore in most of our modern society.
As we'll hear next episode, one of the other strange features of human parenthood is that some of that social support can come from dads, something most other primate fathers avoid.
Thanks to Sarah Hrdy, Stacy Rosenbaum, and Amy Scott for sharing their work. And thanks to Kiki Hansard and doulas everywhere. Origin Stories is a donor-supported project of the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding human origins research and sharing discoveries. The show is made possible by listeners like you. Help us make more episodes by going to leakeyfoundation.org/donate and making a one-time or monthly donation of any amount. I want to thank our listener and new donor, Julie, and her daughters for their donation. This mini-series is generously sponsored by father and daughter Bill Richards and Dana LaJoie. Additional funding for Origin Stories comes from the Anne and Gordon Getty Foundation, Jeanne Newman, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund. This episode was produced by Leo Hornack, sound design by Ray Pang, our editor is Audrey Quinn, recording assistance by Catherine Monahan. Thanks for listening.